Well, it's always a pleasure to welcome everyone to our series, Topics in the Aesthetics of Music and Sound. And today we are welcoming a talk about metal once again, and we will get to that in a moment after we have our usual round of permissions. Is it all right for everyone who's present here to have his or her image appear on YouTube? Our Skype friends, is that the case also?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Bill. And also your audio. Okay, very good. So we have both permission for video and audio. Great. Okay, so we will introduce our speaker, Tvarnø Lind, in just a minute. But as I said, first we'll do our usual round. My name is Cynthia Grund. I'm an associate professor of philosophy here at the University of Southern Denmark, and I have the pleasure of being the director of a research program called the Performances of Everyday Living. And we have members of that program and associate members with us today. So, Johnny, would you like to?
Yes. Hello. My name is Johnny Harboe. I'm a master in comparative literature here from SDU. And I'm a huge metal fan. I've listened to metal for a lot of years and looking very much forward to what Tor has to tell us.
Hi.
Hello, I'm Claudio Cifuentes Aldunate. I teach in literature, Latin American and Spanish literature. With semiotic, I intend to come to see something intelligent about metal.
Okay, very good. And Claudio's our resident expert on the sublime, and is thinking about how we can get some sort of connection between metal and the sublime. Okay.
Later.
Later, yes. Mogens.
Mogens Davidsen, associate professor in the literary part of the Danish department. Interested in cross aesthetics, and my connection with metal will be vitalism and sort of the appeal of intensity and the feeling of life, I think.
Thank you, Mogens. Peters.
Yes, so my name is Peters Vestergaard, and you know me, Tor. I'm an assistant professor of media studies here at the University of Southern Denmark. I'm also very interested in metal music, and yesterday evening I gave a Kucha presentation on extreme metal logos with a special focus on Norwegian black metal, Hans Christian Andersen and Nigel Lawson.
Well, see, there's no topic that can be constructively connected with metal in some way. Okay, and out in Skype world, we have our ever-faithful seminar member, Bill Westney, who is with us from Lubbock, Texas. Bill, would you like to introduce yourself once again?
Yes, I'm Bill Westney. I'm on the faculty of Texas Tech University. I'm a concert pianist and interested in every possible philosophical topic with music, especially as regards music and performance. And I've just begun to sort of stick my toe into the waters of metal music and finding out that it's very complex and interesting and fascinating.
Great to have you here today, and anyone who might be interested can see the very, what should we say, daring talk you gave in November, where you plunged into the connections between Romanticism and metal, and did a very nice job of making plausible connections between Liszt and metal performance. So,
thank you. I should apologize in advance. I may have to leave a little bit before the end of the session today, so I will just, if I have to, I'll just slip away sort of quietly.
Okay,
Thanks.
well, we're glad to have you here for as long as you can be here. And then while we're doing our introductory sort of maneuvers here, I just want to briefly say to our international audience that the F word will be said out loud quite a few times today, but it will be said out loud within the context of fuck up, which is the metal expression for mess up. So we're hoping that we're not going to offend anybody, but it would be quite impossible for Tor to give this talk and not use that expression, at least occasionally. So without any further ado, it's a tremendous pleasure to welcome Tvarnø Lind to Odense today, coming all the way from Copenhagen. And you will tell us a little bit about yourself and then launch into your presentation.
Yes, I will. First, thanks a lot for inviting me. It's a great pleasure, really, to share some of my preliminary thoughts, really, if that's what it is, and ideas on how to work with this particular type of metal or hardcore, as it is today. I will be speaking about a particular album, the production of which has mattered profoundly, really, and that's and I will get back to the concepts and the questions that I will address today.
Before you start, oh good, you're going to tell us a little bit about
exactly.
it, because I think you have a fascinating background.
Yes. What I will be sharing with you today are some of my first experiences as a scholar venturing into the hardcore metal scene of Denmark, or in Denmark, and I have been initiating ethnomusicological fieldwork since last year, and it has been intensivated as I have met these and many other hardcore musicians. So this is the first step of a larger study, ethnomusicological, anthropological, if you like, study of heavy metal in Denmark. Also, I have a wet dream of doing a kind of similar job in Greece, in the hardcore metal scene, and because there's some really interesting stuff going on in Greece, and I believe nobody really studies heavy metal in Greece, so yet, not to my knowledge at least. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And the relation of the heavy metal scene to the crises that are going on. There are some very interesting topics to try to unfold, but that would be in the future. As I did not make my career out of heavy metal studies, I'm initially an ethnomusicologist and a paleographist, if you like, working with Byzantine chant in the Greek Orthodox Church. And I did most of my field work at Mount Athos, the holy mountain in Greece, at a few monasteries there. And it is the front page of my monograph. The past is always present, that you see there in the corner. It's a topic I don't think I will leave it, but for now my interest, as you will understand, is much more into hardcore and heavy metal as for now. Also, I have been studying heterodox, if you like, new religious healing practices with music, new agey relaxation music, that kind of thing. And I've been doing some field work in Copenhagen and the Copenhagen area, but that's, 10 years ago. And latest I published an article, among the many articles on Pussy Riot, on the blasphemy discussion. You will find it at the Danish Musicology Online, if you're interested. So I guess that should be enough about me, and so you know a little about who you see in front of you the next hour. So I believe we'll be using an hour more or less. I think before I start talking about the candidate and their second album, Facing the Imminent Prospect of Death, I think we should listen to the music really to begin with. I think that's a good way to start. So let's see if it works. And you must.
I'm going to bring up the links and send them to Skype.
Yes.
Just one moment here.
You can tell me when I'm over.
Okay, I have a moment as soon as I find your email. then I can put links for YouTube. And these will be sent out in just a second. Get the chat out here. Now they've been sent out. Okay.
Okay.
So how long is the clip? About 3 minutes?
About, no, small 4 minutes.
Okay.
You will hear the entire clip.
So then what I'll do is I'll ask Bill to please listen to this. So, to the first clip, and then I will turn off our microphone. Very good.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want me to start? All right.
Dead, fucking dead.
Let me just give you the members of the band now. Jakob Bredal on vocals, KB on bass, Tvede on guitars, and Niels Peter on drums. The Candidate was formed in 2009 in Aarhus out of the former band, the Downward Candidate, spelled with a C. So, what I want to discuss today is around some of these bullet points. What does analog mean in relation to a digitally produced metal album? What are the aesthetic dimensions of the production method described as fucked up? I will be using Svetlana Boym's concept of reflective nostalgia to try to connect some of these dots. And on the way, I'll be touching upon the analog-digital complex and say a few words about the hardcore metal scene in Denmark. And as a bonus, as you already heard, the first example of some of the Candidates' great music. Needless to say, I'm in general also, other than being a researcher, a huge fan of heavy metal. So, now, a few introductory notes on hardcore in Denmark might be useful. In an introduction to their latest live show in Copenhagen in January this year, at the small venue Beta in that's Shit Clubbing Island in Copenhagen, the Candidate was presented as offering first-class death punk thrash ass-kicking. To those who know the Candidate's music, this designation, ass-kicking, clearly makes sense. But genre categories are notoriously unclear and unwieldy. It is old news, at least among musicologists, that audiences often associate genre categories with different musical experiences, bands, and styles. It is the wild bodily gestures, as you just saw, and the screaming quality of the vocal that makes most listeners identify the Candidate with hardcore, whereas the heavy riffs and grooves typically are elements identified with thrash and death metal, though not foreign to hardcore. Both subgenres have constructed explicit underground styles of metal in opposition to a somewhat mainstream. The Candidate aims at producing metal, as you will hear in a moment, that differs from the, and I quote Jakob Bredal, that differs from the heaps of records out there that all sound the same, end of quote. To define hardcore and the hardcore scene in Denmark is really complicated. My preliminary research into this matter reveals at least two major strands, or two scenes, or positions, if you like. To some, hardcore in Denmark is a punk scene in and of itself, primarily associated with the punk milieu around ungdomshuset, punk-milieu, as we call it in the youth house, I think, translated. Since the 1980s, as part of a self-proclaimed underground culture. Historically, the punk scene too consisted of various strands, but that's a different story. I won't get into that today. The heirs to the so-called K-Town style, K for Copenhagen hardcore, such as direct youth, thrive in a vivid do-it-yourself practice. K-Town hardcore is seen as an extreme variant of punk rather than metal, and includes various kinds of hardcore styles, such as D-beat, crust, and others, often favoring rapid sequences of parallel chords. Some of these hardcore bands have lately become rather successful, as for example Night Fever, and also Hellshook, Decapitation, which is not really a K-Town band as such, but they were developing their music and are hugely attached to ungdomshuset And they have just released Blodets Bånd, a record on Southern Lord record company, which is really a great achievement if you're into this part of the metal scene. You know about Southern Lord, those who issued some of Sun's music and other well-known Wolves in the Throne Room bands like these. So, well, and both bands, by the way, Night Fever and Halsfolk is also among the bands playing at this year's Copenhagen, the heavy metal festival in Copenhagen. Many bands, such as The Candidate, who play hardcore outside the punk milieu, are conscious about being part of a much larger metal scene in Denmark. Hardcore as metal, the bands in this part of the scene are, for example, the Psych Project, Just in Hate, Hexis, No Fealty, Tsar, Barricade, Ruined, Piss Vortex, Anti-Ritual, etc., etc. Many great band names. All of whom in various ways mix hardcore with extreme metal elements. Heavy riffs and grooves are frequent. It would seem that these two scenes are somehow organized in distinct networks, arrange different concerts, and only few musicians are actually relating to both scenes. And to my great surprise, some of the musicians, they don't really know about the existence of the other. So hardcore is really, what is hardcore? I love that kind of complex thing. So, but we can discuss that later if you like. Most of the musicians I've been talking to suggest a hardcore epicenter in Copenhagen, but they all emphasize the strong musical ties to bands and do-it-yourself festivals in the province, in cities like Fredericia, Aarhus, Odense, Aalborg, and their ties as well to Germany and Sweden and even America. Both strands or both scenes share prominent anti-mainstream rhetoric in terms of musical aesthetics, and many bands produce and distribute their own music. Some bands in both scenes, though, make professional studio arrangements as well, as part of a DIWO, if you call it, do it with others practice. For example, Facing the Imminent Prospect of Death is recorded and mixed and mastered by Jakob Bredal himself, and then released at the Austrian record company Napalm Records. I had a talk with a drummer bassist, sorry, in Just in Hate, and he would say, "Whoa, I think you won't find hardcore bands that relate to death metal. These genres are so opposite, so far away from each other." And it was a surprise to me to find out then that some of the major inspirations for The Candidate is actually early Swedish death metal, but it might relate to the ways these records mentioned here on the screen are produced. This was before the great boom and increased or better quality of sound producing that started in USA and other.
When would you date that about?
In the beginning of the 1990s.
Okay.
So I'm talking about Dismember and Unleashed, their first records. But also, of course, they are great. It's inspired greatly by Trap Them. I was lucky enough to last year at Copenhagen I was there at the concert and I saw The Candidate they were standing there and watching, listening, participating in the Trapton concert.
But I meant the Great Boom. When would you date that? You said it was before the Great Boom.
Well, these are just released before. What is the name of this producer who made some of?
Thomas Goldberg.
No, in America.
Oh.
I'm thinking. It might come back to me in a while. He produced most of Cannibal Corpses and.
Morrisound Studios. It was.
Yeah.
Andy Sneap? No.
That wasn't the name I was thinking of.
But the year for that would be about.
In the early 90s.
That's okay, and this is right before that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's my idea. That's why you might also hear some death metal heaviness. Anyway, let me continue. All right. The initial plan was to make an analog recording, but as Jakob Brede does not have a tape recorder of his own, and renting one proved too expensive, the band recorded the music digitally, as if the Pro Tools program was a tape recorder. Performing 2 and 2 live, for example, the guitar with the drums, and that was the way they did it. Vocalist of the candidate Jakob Brede is also a music producer, and he has his own studio in Aarhus Dead Rat Studio. And at Dead Rat Studio's homepage, Brede seems to position his studio ethos in opposition to the widespread use of digital technologies in studio productions. And let me get back to this teaser just in one moment and to see what Brede says about this. I like live recordings in the studio with full band, beat detective and auto-tune. I hate it. I never use it and I never will. And I'm no fan of copy-paste music either. Music should be played by human beings, not computers. I use my Pro Tools. I don't abuse it. And in some of the interviews I had with him, he frequently uses the word in Danish, disgusting or naughty, about digitized, over-digitized productions. All right, let's hear this clip. It's a bit shorter than the first one. And you will let me know when I...
Yep, fine.
Yep, you can play. sequence here. Okay. So, when I interviewed Kobe and Jakob Bredal at Copenhagen last year, I was curious to know some more about this making an analog album that was really digitally produced. It doesn't make sense, or how does it make sense? And this is another quote from the interview I made with him. He says, "When all snare drum beats sound the same, the real music is gone. I know guitarists who concentrate intensely on getting a rhythmic figure perfect. And when they've got it, they copy-paste those few bars to the rest of the track. To me, this is fake. It destroys everything that relates to dynamics, sincerity, the sense of being alive. Slowly you teach your brain that the beats in the music should sound like a perfectly balanced sound editing program. Man, it sucks." So, this will bring us to a few notes on the analog. What does that mean, and how do we conceptualize around that? Let me see now. Yes. Old media are resurfacing in the metal scene. Many of the bands I mentioned spend a lot of the time and energy in designing their albums and distribute them on LP cassette tapes, even when the music is also streamed. As Reynolds, that's Reynolds with his famously book Retromania, has it, the tape was the ultimate in do-it-yourself. And because it could be dubbed on demand at home, whereas vinyl required a heavier financial outlay and contractual arrangement with a manufacturer. Many of the bands I have been talking to, they're actually releasing their music on cassette tapes. As late as 2 weeks ago, No Fealty made a cassette tape. To release music on LP and cassette tape, and these are always limited editions, you must know, is one of the ways that hardcore bands position themselves as an elitist other, I would say, in the music business. To the average mainstream music listener, the cassette tape and perhaps the LP are obsolete technologies. And the cassette tape is hardly do-it-yourself anymore, as only few owns a cassette player these days. So there's a notion about the nostalgic, the old technology here, which is pretty clear. The tendency of reintroducing old electrical hardware is shared with many other kinds of music where they are used together with digital equipment. In analog days, and that's a book by Pinch and Trocco, just to note that I have a list of references towards the end of my PowerPoint slide, so you don't have to search or ask for them. We will leave it there for you to...
We could also put that up on the text underneath.
Yeah, we could do that, sure. They speak of the analog revival, referring to the re-entering of older electronic musical equipment, including vintage synthesizers and tape recorders, into sound studios and live scenes. The revitalization of pre-digital music recording equipment is nurtured by the audiophile conviction that an analog sound recording is an accurate, and that's another word for authentic, representation of the original sound. This is often coupled with a longing for the warm, fuzzy, dirty analog sound. And these are all quotes from Pinch and Trocco in their study of the analog synthesizers. In opposition to this, digital sound is experienced as clean, cold, I don't know if any of you are using Pro Tools or have experience with it. Some of you have, I'm sure, more than I have, definitely. But these actually mirror visually the fascination with outdated technological equipment, the equipment that these software programs are meant to replace. And this is all these knobs and wires that you see on the screen. You could do it in many more easy ways, I'm sure. But this is how the programs are actually copies of the old machines that took a lot of space. Anyway, so the software itself, as Reynolds has it, creates an effect of instant nostalgia. Just like this picture, I just stumbled over it on the internet of this. This is really an early iPod device, but it is designed as an old gramophone player. So it's a nice symbol of I think what Reynolds is trying to say. For band members of the candidate, it is not really a matter of digital versus analog sound. After all, it is only a question of sound, as Kobe said in the interview. I quote him again, somewhere in the process, the sound will go digital no matter what, if you want to stream it or get it on CD, end of quote. So the meaning of analog is not a concern about sound quality as such, rather it relates to a wider complex of musical practices where the hardware itself is in fact important. It is therefore not a matter of technological evolution as such, but rather a question of materiality, musical practice, practicalities, and aesthetics. Cassette tapes and vinyl are perishable, they break, and the stock of limited editions runs out. And what is more, analog recording is understood to have a destructive reproduction process, you might say. It is limited how many times you can actually cut in an analog tape. In the end, you will destroy it. So you have to make decisions in a more decisive way, and perhaps you do with an editing program that is on a software. Okay. So in a sense, it allows only a limited number of copies. This finity, this imminent prospect of termination, really, that characterizes analog sound recording and musical equipment is an important part of how musical intensity and proximity is produced in hardcore music, such as the candidates' music on their record. The analog-digital complex is not only a technical matter, but relates profoundly to issues of depth and metaphysics. It's a widespread idea that the live and natural quality of analog sound brings the music, and hence its performers, closer to the listener, because natural sound is believed to be analog. So the one moment is believed to flow into the next without interruption. The superiority of analog sound was notably celebrated by the indie culture that influenced the 1980s alternative rock scene. By contrast, it is a common understanding that because a digital sound recording quantifies sound, the music is characterized by a chain of disconnected units. In his article, The Death and Life of Digital Audio, musicologist Jonathan Stern problematizes the metaphysical idea of the time-sound relation in analog media as continuous. The quality of sound, Stern insists, is not meaningful without a listening body. Stern is skeptical towards the idea that the distance between musician and the listener is greater in digital media than in analog. And that this should create a greater loss of being somewhere, a loss of being, excuse me, and that this should create a greater loss of being somewhere on the way. If this was the case, as Stern he argues, analog recordings would be less mediated than digital ones, which is nonsense in Stern's line of logic. He argues that behind these questions lies the premise that a recording contains a quantity of life, and that as a recording traverses an ever larger number of technological steps, that quantity of life decreases, essentially moving it, and perhaps the listener, toward death. That was a quotation again from his article. In other words, a digital recording is as lively as any analog recording ever were, and Stern maintains that the context of specific listening situations must be taken into account. And I quote Stern again, "The question of life in a recording is a social question, not an ontological or metaphysical one." End of quote. The experience of sound concerns what happens inside the listener's body, Stern continues to argue, and not only outside of it. With the standard sample rate for a CD at 44.1 Hertz, that's a second of sound, is divided into 44,100 data segments, and these will be converted into a stream of sound when played on a CD player. That is what we normally would call music, that stream of sound. So in the end, we experience as listeners all these data segments as music as we would if it was an analog gramophone. No more technological stuff or details for now. So let me continue. Let me just see here. Let me just see, I think I just lost track a bit. I would love to play the third and last example. That is a track that did not end up on the album I'm talking about. This was made into a video instead, and somehow it merges with the studio ethos with Jacob Breidal. So it's hard to say whether this is the candidate or if this is Dead Rat Studio. I think it's pretty much the same. But let's see it and hear it. And what you will notice when you see these pictures that still photographs that on the video, you will have these messages on the screen communicating that this is live and recorded as harsh as we could, done in one day, mixed in 1 hour, fuck it all, fuck everything, all fucked up. And as you will understand, the way that Jacob Breidal is using the word harsh, it's really in the sense of sincere or authentic or real, and he uses the word raw pretty much in the same sense as the Danish rå. Must be the same words. All right, let's see and listen to this example.
Broken hearts, or from helplessness.
Right. I see this expression as a sinnbild on Breda's work as a musician as well as his studio ethos. The music should be played live and the sound should be harsh, as I just mentioned. That's the word Breda uses frequently in the meaning real or sincere. The candidate music is not fantasy metal, as Breda points out. I don't know if you got that impression by now, but just to be sure. It's not about satanic invocations or anything the like, as Breda describes the album. And I quote him from the interview. He says, "This album is very real, dealing with everyday stuff. Music should fucking tear you apart. After all, music is feelings, and sometimes you feel pain." To be sure, there's nothing really fucked up about the candidate's album, quite the contrary. The pictures, as we saw them, are professional black and white quality. They portray the energy of photogenic musicians in action. The presence of the F word, oh, I said it, I'm being polite, in the music serves aesthetic means, to be sure. The music video, All Fucked Up, is illustrative of how the expression is part of an affective discursive practice that not only describes the experience of disappointment in life, of being pissed or stoned or messed up, as you put it before, which the hardcore audiences might in some way share or identify with emotionally. It is also used as a metaphor for the adequate production practice for music that communicates these exact experiences. It is the aesthetics of fuck up or being fucked up. Perhaps this particular kind of modern hardcore's way of celebrating or even romanticizing the amateurism and energy that described the early garage recordings. I will get back to some of those just in a minute. All right. This is just to show a short or one example of the inner cover of how it has been designed. I think visually to strengthen this idea of being messy, of being well, you see, I'm lacking words. That's really the idea. It's just fuck up. It's messy. Life is messy, and that's the idea. And that's why they also did not, except for this first track on the album, printed the entire lyrics. Lyrics for the rest of the tracks are only there in fragments, as something that you should. They want you to listen carefully to the record and listen for yourself, see if you can find out. Or perhaps it's not really, is it that important? It's somewhere between those. It's, by the way, it's hand-drawn, which is a point. It's drawn with chlorine, coffee, and what do you call it? Encre de Chine, black ink, by a tattooist, Uncle Alan. There you see him. He's drawing on these very big boards, and it comes out as a CD booklet. You see. This was completely hand-drawn, and only in the end, just as if they would have liked with sound recording, it was digitally copied for production means. They didn't copy-paste anything in visually or in the graphics. just a complete parallel to what they did with the sound. I guess perhaps they did touch another too, but that's the whole idea. So what I'm getting at here is really that intensity and sentiment in music, in many ways, can be communicated or produced in music in several ways. In the lyrics, of course, but when you don't have the lyrics, or if you can't hear the lyrics, and you won't find the candidates' lyrics on the internet. If you Google the candidate Modvind, one of the Danish tracks, lyrics, you won't find it anywhere. So there's a play of secrecy of some kind. The intensity is somewhere else. It might be in the materiality of the voice, of the body of the voice. I'm of course thinking about Roland Barthes' notion of the grain of the voice, which might be one way to cope with this. As I have shown, it's also in the sound in some way. It's in terms of production, that you want to produce your music as if it is on some kind of analog, an analog way or sense, or that guide or dogma that guides the way you are using the equipment. It's in the discourse, the way you are talking about the music, and of course in the live performances also. This intensity it won't go unnoticed, of course. You see the energy of the movements of the musicians. You see the audiences are moshing around and doing many stunts, from the stage diving, etc. And also, as I try to suggest here, in the visual, the artwork, in the cover, the textbook, etc. The video is also pretty clear. One of the I want to point direct your attention to a very interesting study by Rosemary Overell. She writes from New Zealand. Great book, in affective intensities in extreme music scenes, and she is sort of developing this notion of affective intensity in the grindcore scene in Melbourne and Osaka in Japan, which is thought-provoking, and the thoughts she has here, I share her ideas and notions of this affect. And this is some of the issues I want to pursue further in Helsinki, where I believe many of us will meet this summer at the conference on modern heavy metal. I won't go too much into details now about the intensity. That wasn't my plan, but I want to just to mention that this is. I find that a very fruitful way to proceed, definitely. Now let's get to let me find my on the reviews. Because how was this music perceived by the reviewers? 2012. The reviewers are facing the imminent prospect of death. Emphasized, all of them, the musical intensity of the record. Jensen, a critic from the web scene devolution.dk, describes the music as organic, and the songs in terms of short, compact, potent, and a kick in the balls of those who expect to relax while listening. End of quote. And when he emphasized that Bredahl, and I quote, screams his lungs to shred, end of quote, It points exactly to the appreciation of the effort and labor invested by the vocalist. The phrase "a kick in the balls" points to the demand of a physical response to the listener. If you're kicked in your balls, something you might react, right? And presumably, of course, the listener hears one with a pair of balls. A critic in a local newspaper in Aarhus, Kasper Kusk, compliments the production of the album when emphasizing that, and I quote him, "There is no compensation for the eventual shortcomings in the studio. It is the real deal, flowing out of the loudspeakers, like it or leave it." End of quote. And at the web scene Metal Underground, an enthusiastic review of the album goes as follows, and you have only some of it here in writing. I will read it aloud in the whole part. "This is a mean, unforgiving arsenal of thrashy, death-tinged songs that pulverizes you not with a constant high-speed frontal charge, but through the raw, genuine rage embedded in the very essence of the playing. No posturing, satanic black metal wannabes can hope to terrify on this level when frontman Jakob Bredal bellows, 'Memories lost, memories gone, dead, fucking dead,' over the grooving crunch of the 'Let the maggots have it.' Produce neither too much nor too little, facing the imminent prospect of death, sounds exactly as its makers believe it should, like 4 expert musicians playing a tight, precise live show, where the digitized soullessness of excessive effects," I love that sentence, "the digitized soullessness of excessive effects and overdubs is off the table." Bredal's way of handling, that was end of quote, sorry, it was so long that I lost track of it myself. Bredal's way of handling digital music production seems not to have been a hindrance to the critics' experience of the music's soul, as Overkill Exposure suggests in this quotation. Rather, the candidate uses the equipment in a manner that the software manufacturers did not foresee or intend. And now I get back to the notion of the garage rock. Kasper Willumsen writes on the online metal scene Devolution, describes the album as an album produced digitally, but with analog sound production as an ideal. But what does that mean? The sound quality of garage rock from the mid-1960s was relatively unsophisticated and raw, due to the first Fox boxes, which created the sine qua non metal effects such as distortion and overdrive. Obviously, the candidate's music does not sound like garage rock of the mid-1960s, but the way of talking about the candidate's music resembles the garage rock revival discourse. For example, the White Stripes' contribution to the revitalization of rock music speaks volumes, and I quote Everett True in one of his books on the White Stripes. "The White Stripes sound is raw, stripped right back to the primal fury and alienation of bluesmen like Sunhouse and protopunks like the Stooges and MC5, end of quote. And this turn of the millennium wave of revival was preconditioned by a much broader revival in the 1980s, which celebrated the style of the original garage recordings, described as amateurish, energetic, and filled with attitude. Now I'm coming towards my conclusions. To understand how rock music's past can be a resource for renegotiating what it means to produce a sincerely harsh sound today, I find Svetlana Boym's use of reflective nostalgia particularly useful.
Unlike restorative nostalgia, reflective nostalgia does not signify return to some original stasis. It is not engaged in reconstruction work or to rebuild a sense of home. Reflective nostalgia is concerned with the, and I quote Boehm, with the irrevocability of the past and human finitude, end of quote, and allows for longing and critical thinking a coexistence, rather than separating affective memory with critical reflection. It is a type of nostalgia that is inconclusive and fragmentary and opens up for the human virtual imagination a multitude of potentialities, as she calls it. And this relates profoundly to human creativity. So, the reference to analog sound and technology makes issues, in relation to the candidate's music, makes issues of nostalgia hard to ignore, I believe, let alone a discussion of what analog means in this particular case. Nostalgia is often seen as an irrational or romantic longing for some more or less remote past, differing from dominating late capitalist ideologies of growth and progress. In this light, nostalgia is seen as counterproductive. Yet, nostalgia can be a point of departure for creative musical practice, which might also express a timely and necessary critique of contemporary society, which shouldn't go unnoticed. In this sense, nostalgia is a complex projection of idealized vintage gear and past practices that merges with a dissatisfaction with the present. Nostalgia as collective critique of progress can prove to be a changing point, a playground where to try out new possibilities and practices. And where Trevor Pinch and Frank Trucco, in their detailed study of the synthesizer, see, and I quote them, salient criticisms of how the synthesizer has evolved and expressions of genuine feelings of loss, I argue that something similar might be the case in the metal scene, as exemplified with the candidate. The kind of nostalgia implied in critical reflection on the modern condition, Boehm calls of modern. The adverb of confuses our sense of direction. It makes us explore side shadows and back alleys rather than the straight road of progress. It allows us to detour from the deterministic narrative of 20th century history. This idea contains a paradox. It offers critique of the modern fascination of everything new, which might include digital sound production. Yet, simultaneously, it is itself fascinated with objects and practices of the past. Creative nostalgia is thus more than an artistic device. It might be a survival strategy, a way of making sense in an alienated present, rather than returning to some past. We might understand Breda's studio as a playground where the candidate's creative self is unfolding. And now, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, the candidate invests in their music as well as discursively an in-your-face attitude with harsh and raw recordings, handheld musical instruments and hand-drawn cover art. That the musicians can play it and the artist can paint it are markers of the non-fake. The mistrust in digital production formats reduces digital software to a tape recorder, which seems better to communicate the desired intensity and experiences of being all fucked up. Simultaneously, the candidate enjoys the obvious technical and economic advantages of digital recording and production, which is less time-consuming, to be sure. And this, of course, facilitates the practice of doing a song in one day and mixing it in 1 hour. Thanks.
Thank you.
minutes ago, but thanks you also, and we'll, of course, see the rest of the talk when we get it out on YouTube. I think there are a lot of things that we can dig into here, and I almost have to give you the first word, Mons, because quite a few comments were made here that I think, excuse the expression, were music to your ears. Yes.
Oh yes, very much, because I thank you very much for a very interesting presentation, and I agree with almost everything you say, and it gives to me a perspective on the subject that is very interesting. Because I mean, your title and your interest in the fucked up nature of things, for one thing, is things I've been working with in connection with modernism in the 20th century, is perhaps that rather than seeing the world as an ordered place where you sort of temporarily have disorder, you evolve into, at least with some artistic expression, into seeing the world as chaos. I mean, this is not something that will pass, it's the way the world is. Referred to in other connection to Lars von Trier's Antichrist, where chaos reigns. This is not something that will pass, but it could be the nature of the world as we know it. And this gives a great potential, and you could say that any artistic interpretation of that, where you juxtapose expressions that you have they are unresolved, you cannot resolve these crashes into something harmonic, gives you this intense feeling of life. So there's no opposition between life and the expression of death. I mean, that's what I think, because it's very intriguing that this Brede talks so much about hearness, presence, the feeling of life, dynamics, and yet what he says almost exclusively in this teaser is death, death, death. But you feel it. So I think that's very, and you just came with a comment that it sort of tries to make up with the habitual narration of 20th century. I mean, we've been into that a lot in our other seminars, where we differ between the structure of the mind, which is the structure of the mind is to the literary mind to make up stories of the world. But it doesn't mean that is the way the world is. So the clash between what the mind attempts to do and the sensation you actually get from the world is very important. And so, but the mind narrates or tells stories because that is what it can do. And once you sort of challenge that nature of understanding, you almost immediately into an artistic expressions of dissonance and contrast and depth. I think that's very interesting, and it really confirms many things that we have been talking about and trying to theorize about. So it's very interesting.
Can I just a few comments? I give very little space here for Svetlana Boehm's thoughts and ideas, and they are very much along with what you were saying about this. This is another way of being. This is not anti-modern, but it's another story, another experience of being a modern human being.
Yes,
exactly. So,
and I've never heard of her before, so I like the reference, and I'm really going to to dig into it, because I think it's very
and then what we can do, we can print this out also underneath the video.
That'd be very fine.
Yeah. I'd like to go to Vitus next, since you've just done all this work on a museum exhibition about the interplay between the music and metal culture and the various graphic representations. And I'd like to hear what you have to say as a continuation of Mons's remarks, because it seems that every effort is made here to point out that a non-narrative kind of manifestation is being made, because you said that the lyrics are not even provided in any kind of continuous fashion. So it's as if, if you'd like to pick up the ball from there, I think.
Yeah, and I think, thank you for the presentation, so it was so interesting. And I think that's true for this case, the candidate, and it would also be true for a lot of other bands and albums. But I think that we see two different things in metal. We also see the exact opposite, where we have bands making concept albums where they want to tell a story, even very narrative, like bands like King Diamond, who's famous for making it's almost like a horror novel or a selection of horror short stories in one album. So that would be a completely different way of doing it. But I think one thing I found really interesting was the way they really tried to integrate the visual side of their music with the audio side of the music. And I can totally see the idea that it's messy, it's raw, it's harsh, and it's also harsh on the visual side. And I think that's something you see in a lot of bands, whether they try to make a sort of A to Z narrative or whether they try to make something more chaotic. I think you see a lot of cases where you can definitely see from the visual style where they're going with the music, and I very often hear the same story from fans, and I heard it also yesterday. Fans buying albums based on the album cover, or almost exclusively based on the album cover, because sometimes you don't have the opportunity to really listen, so you just take a shot at it. This looks like something that I would like to listen to, and in many cases it's spot on. It's spot on. You get what it looks like, and I think in the candidate's case, I think you very much you get what it looks like, and it looks like what it is. Looks like what it sounds like. Yeah,
right. Or it sounds like what it looks like.
Yeah, and I think it goes very much together. But I had a question for you, Tor, sort of a very broad question, because I also found the Svetlana Boym reference very interesting, and I hadn't heard of Svetlana Boym either. So I wanted to ask you more about the concept, reflective nostalgia. And the other concept, which was it recreational? What was it? Nostalgia?
Reconstructive.
Reconstructive nostalgia. Right. So do you think that they are sort of two completely different categories, or would it more be like a continuum?
Restorative nostalgia.
Yeah.
Restorative nostalgia.
That's it. Because I was thinking that sometimes when bands do something where they look back, and this can be in a lot of ways. For instance, in this case, if I understand the candidate right, what they're looking back on is primarily a production practice and an aesthetic audio practice from not so far ago, actually, not so far ago, where other bands, they have a nostalgia that's about the Middle Ages or the prehistory or something like that. So that's another era, and that's very different in a way, because it's impossible to recreate. And there are some bands who try to sort of mix in what they feel like Viking music might have sounded like in their album, but we don't know. We don't know what Viking music sounded like. So would you call that a restorative nostalgia, when you try to mix in what you feel Viking music might have sounded like, or would you call it a reflexive reflective kind of nostalgia. Because in fact what I'm asking you is, are they two different categories? Is it sort of a continuum or mixed, or I only just heard the concepts.
Yeah. Now Boeing develops these concepts and many other different aspects of them through an entire book. So it's a bit beyond the what I'm able to do here. But I would say that nostalgia is in play in many different ways in heavy metal. This is not a standard analysis you can make on all kinds of heavy metal, of course. And you can't say this is restorative, and this is reflective in that sense. If you think about a band such as Impalers, for example, are they from Horsens? Or I think so. They play what I think they call themselves Teutonic, German thrash metal. They have these t-shirts without the T really. They rip off and they have the hair of the early 80s, and they play sort of exactly that kind of thrash music, thrash metal that you would play as a Creator and some of the other German bigger bands. So they're still active. So is it nostalgic, or is it really the past is still also the present? But in a sense, they try to their guitars and their whole appearance look as if they came from Germany in a space shuttle from the 80s. Boom. Right. When they stand there, of course, their sound is new and modern and etc. But I would say this is it's a bit different.
Because that's an attempt to reconstruct.
It's definitely a statement, this is real metal.
Right.
All the modern stuff that the rest of you are playing, the Candidate or death metal or all this blackened atmospheric post-metal shit, it's not really metal. This is how it's back to the old days. I was a teenager then. I wasn't, old days.
Kind of Puritan.
Yes.
The
Vikings is I think also a play with deep history in another sense.
Right.
It's not really restoring anything with that distorted air guitar, is it?
No.
But it's a play with identity and values. It's definitely that you somehow place in a distant past. What past is kind of fuzzy, but.
Right.
But I think the notion of nostalgia is important in many aspects, not all aspects, and not only nostalgia, but there's in much metal, I believe, some kind of a sense of longing for something. Perhaps a more true picture of they might share this, a more true picture of what it means being a human being. Well, accepting those cracks that we talked about before, this unresolved puzzle of life or whatever, and death, being it celebrating pre-Christian, pagan, whatever values that you believe the Vikings honored.
Right.
I mean, I may be completely off the mark here, but before the discussion moves on too much, I'll ask our literary panel here. I mean, the word Sehnsucht keeps occurring to me. Do you think, is that appropriate here in this discussion of nostalgia or not?
Well, Sehnsucht would be something like longing.
Yeah, because when you said longing, I thought, okay, then I'm not completely off the mark here.
It requires that there's something that you can long for.
So it requires an object as such.
It requires an object. I mean, it was Goethe who said that the fact that you long for something proves that it's there.
Proved it?
Yes, that's what Goethe said, but he was...
That's right.
The German band Rammstein, they have a song.
Yeah.
Entitled
Sehnsucht. And they are frequently referring to Goethe in many of their songs. As direct quotation, if you like, and play with
mindsets.
So that there is then a vein of this within metal culture, you would say then, sort of a Sehnsucht kind of nostalgia as well. If we're going to start making a primitive typology of nostalgia here.
I don't know if there's a vein. I find the concept useful. Nostalgia, that something is there as well. It's not really. Perhaps it's not so a big mystery that musicians they used to refer to what musicians did before them. And in that sense, you would see somebody who is evaluating the thrash metal of the 80s, or the Stooges, as we said, or the White Stripes even. I think it's not only metal. Perhaps it's a rock music thing, really.
Because I have a few comments that are going to get us off into another tangent. But before we leave nostalgia, I was wondering, Claudio, if you had anything you wanted to say, because this is sort of up your alley, the nostalgia and you know.
No, it is something that they use in tango, for example. Sorry, tango.
The tango is very nostalgic.
Is very nostalgic. Yeah. So maybe we have to make the difference between melancholia and nostalgia.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because it's different. But yeah.
And bringing up the whole idea of melancholia, I mean, there are huge areas of metal that explicitly are dealing with dark sides of life and melancholia and depression and what have you. So it'd be interesting to see, are there aspects of nostalgia in that, or is that something that should be sort of sorted out?
Again, I'm trying to use the concept of nostalgia analytically. What happens if I use this concept to think with? And could in how many ways can we understand nostalgia? I'm not saying that nostalgia is relevant for all aspects of even the candidates' music. It was in fact called a concept album dealing with death, according to the first time, and it's very black. It's very depressing. It's hard to listen to. I think that's the sense I get. So it demands something of the listener, right? And this does not necessarily have to do with the concept of nostalgia anyway. That goes towards the intensity concept. But I'm trying to make more concepts meeting.
This is also where I think Johnny has some comments that can be brought to bear upon all this, because I'm a rather new theorizer about metal. I'm a rather new listener to metal. Okay, I've only been actively listening, perhaps during the last year or so, really trying to penetrate what is going on and learning about all the different genres and spending time with it. And what is a bit of an issue for me here is that on the one hand you have all this talk about authenticity, which also showed up here. It's not only the black metal people who are authenticity mongers, as it were. And it seems to me that there is an interesting tension between authenticity and nostalgia. Nostalgia seems to be this longing for a time in which you don't find yourself now. And to go through all of these really extensive efforts to make analog-like sound in a digital context, that to me starts to raise questions about authenticity, as it were, because what you're doing is you're simulating an analog environment, as it were. And I'm just curious if you have any remarks about that.
Oh yes, definitely. That's why I started. I wrote the authenticity part out of it.
Okay.
Because I needed space to all the other stuff. It's definitely there. I'm just not using the word.
Would you care to make a few comments about it now?
Well, of course it's. Authenticity might be another concept to use again analytically in order to figure out what is going on in this music, and you might take it in that direction. Of course, it's about being, if these expressions that they are trying to do vocally, semiotically, sonically, are sincere expressions of real experiences. This is really a very old rock authenticity discussion, right? Then the question comes: what kind of musical production somehow produces or communicates these experiences the best way? And that's also a question of authenticity. Of course, it is. It's not really absent from the nostalgia discussion in my mind. So I perfectly agree with you.
So we should define what is the best way.
I'm not defining what the best way is. I'm trying to understand what the candidate, why they make a digital album, but talks about it as if it was an analog album. Why do we do that? Why this emphasis on the analog? That's important.
And it's very easy to turn this whole authenticity discussion on its head and back again, because then one could say, well, isn't it more authentic to admit that you like the analog sound shaping, as it were, but then to use the digital means that we now have at our disposal, rather than pretending to be working with, rather than going back and sort of rebuilding some old cassette players or whatever, and then using that, because at the time, when it was fresh, it had a different sort of relationship to creating the music than using it in some sort of a retro way now would. So I think that the whole authenticity discussion has some very, very interesting turn-offs when we start to look at this production question, because I think you can use it as a sword that cuts both ways, as it were. You know,
definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so old that I've been listening to music in a pre-digital era. And I remember listening to LP records where they were directly cut, not with no tape in between. For instance, the Toccata and Fuga by Bach. And it was really an experience. At least I imagine I can hear something else. But, so it was perhaps they should try a directly cut version of some of these bands. It would be very expensive.
Yeah, I think it's also important to point out that it's not just any sound they long for, or any production they long for the candidate. To my ears, it's pretty obvious that they want to sound like Swedish death metal bands from the start of the 90s, Unleashed, Entombed, and so on and so on. It's this what's called Sunlight sound, Sunlight Studios in Sweden. I believe it was there that Thomas Skogsberg was producer. Yeah, what's he called? The other one, Danish Tvarnø was also around at that time. You can look that up. But I think one of the things in death metal music that everyone longs for now is exactly sounding like these early Swedish bands. In black metal, they want to sound like Dark Throne and the Norwegian bands, and in death metal, they want to sound like have this muddy, very thick, flowing sound, which the Swedish death metal bands had in the first years of the 90s. So it's not just any sound they want. They don't want to sound like Discharge from the 80s or something like that. Although they maybe are closer to them stylistically, but they want to have this thick, brutal sound in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm.
So do you know, do they make any live albums? Because that would be another way to make it even more raw and harsh and authentic. Have they thought about that?
I don't know really if they did think about it, but they haven't made one yet. They're planning a new studio album.
Right.
But you can find on the internet various private recordings from live shows.
Because in a way that the result of a live recording, I'm sure they're very good live. In one of the reviews, they were labeled as very good and experienced musicians and so on. So they're probably very, but perhaps in a live situation, they would actually not be satisfied with the lack of being able to tweak it to sound in exactly that way. Because I guess even though they do this one day composing, 1 hour mixing thing, they still have some extra artistic freedom in the mixing and editing process to get to sound exactly like this.
Definitely. As some of the bands, I talked to some musicians from Justin Hate,
right.
Another hardcore something
right.
band in Copenhagen, and they said, in a sense, that if we could make our record sound like an ordinary Wednesday in the rehearsing room,
right.
that would be hardcore, really.
Yes.
That would be the most authentic, quote unquote.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Because that's how it should be. It shouldn't be nurtured anything. It shouldn't be taken care of anything. Just that's how it sounds, here and there.
Right.
And actually, they are doing these do-it-yourself types in both scenes, both at the youth house and metal scene people. They are starting now in Copenhagen, or at least I'm being aware of it as of now, of doing these release concerts and concerts that get together 3 or 4 bands, and they make a concert in the rehearsing rooms.
Mm.
And they advertise it just 1 or 2 weeks before on Facebook, and you get in that tiny space. It's only a little space, and people are standing in the hallway, and they can't really enter in because they're only musicians and moshing, and it's a mess, really. It's such a mess, and the sound is you know. But beers are 10 krona, and you know, it's and for 20 krona you get a lot of great live music.
Yeah.
And sweating is guaranteed. You know, it's so and that's I don't know. I believe I haven't been studying live records and studio records and compared, but I think it's 2 very different things, as you suggest. And I think if you want this quality sound, you will make a studio album. The sound in a live recording is typically not as well. It's different.
Yeah, exactly.
I know what you mean about the energy, but it's really being live, being present.
Yeah.
And tomorrow it's too late. You know.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's part of the deal of being hardcore. And there might be some issues to hardcore, the hardcore scene really in itself. There are some differences, I believe.
I'm thinking if there were some philosophical implications of it, because it's quite interesting, the idea that they are against sort of the digitalized sound, because it appears as if there are moments of sound with space in between them, whereas we just listen to it as if there were no space in between them, and these little bits. It is very much like Henri Bergson's critique of the concept of time, where he says he has the concept of la durée, where he says, if we use the Kantian way of understanding time, we look at time as if it was a neutral medium, a kind of space where the change of things take place within this space. And that is not the way time is. He says that the fact that things changes are time, or is time. It's not, they don't take place in a neutral medium. So it has to do with understanding the nature of the world, actually. So it's not just an opposition against a quality of sound. It has perhaps some more fundamental ontological implications as well. I don't know if it's conscious but he seems like a very sincere person, this vocalist. It could be sort of his instinct saying that's the way I think it should be.
And the way Jonathan Stern is discussing this digital analog sound, he's also having these kind. I think he's actually referring to yeah. And he discusses that actually time is you can't divide time into the indefinite.
No, you can't. You can't separate time from what goes on in time.
Exactly.
That's a very central thing. It has to do with authenticity, and it has to do with the lack of generalization, that every moment is special because you can't generalize it and say this is something we know from experience, fuck experience.
But again, it's emphasizing that you need a listener. You need an experiencing body somewhere if you want to talk about time in any or music for that matter, in any meaningful sense. Who's experiencing this?
I remember when Vitus once was telling me about how there are certain sub-genres within metal where it's very en vogue to have one of, say, 50 recordings, and they're no more than that, and then etc. So, are there any bands that walk the plank all of the way and refuse to record and only can be heard live? Has anyone taken that step?
I think actually the notorious and famous Pentagram did so in the early 80s.
Okay.
You could only hear them live. Early recordings, somehow. That's a restoration project for some aficionados. Also, I think the live concert might get a new, there might come a bit of that sense that you are suggesting of this is it tomorrow night, and then it's over. You lost it. It's gone. So it's a kind of it's not nostalgia turning into something. You are longing for something that hasn't even begun. I remember last October, the Psych Project. They have been playing the music for 15 years. They were announcing that this will be our last concert. And they did in the newspaper Politiken, they did it on Facebook, they did it here and there and everywhere, and at a level that they had never been doing. And this, well, I was amazed. I have been listening to their music for years, and I was at their shows many times, and it was 20 people, 40 people, no big deal. It was great concerts, but nobody really knew them. At this concert, I was standing outside Pumpehuset in line for more than an hour. I was actually being frightened. Will I get a ticket? It will be sold out. And all these in front of me, these guys, they were 20-year-olds. They were wearing diapers when the Psych Project started playing the music. And I was like, what's going on? Is the free beer that they promised everybody or what? This was the announcement of a last concert. We are splitting up. I got in, and it was a full house. 600 persons heard their last concert.
crowd surfing and the moshing, and they were playing hardcore. They play sort of hardcore, chaotic, whatever, very intense music for 2 hours. Everybody was exhausted. Hardcore music is supposed to, a concert is supposed to last half an hour at the most, because everybody's. It demands such an intense energy, burst of energy. So that was really something special, and everybody was talking about this as one of the concerts of the year last year in Denmark, for some reason.
And the musicians didn't collapse playing 2 hours?
I was amazed how they could perform. They were crowd surfing while playing bass and guitar. And they were doing a floor show. So the audiences they were standing in between the musicians, moshing, and between the songs they had to say, please, could you step back just half a meter, give us a little space just to see each other, so we can get the number started. They were really pushing people back, because it was too much. Also for them, it was really. I think
too much proximity.
100 guys without t-shirts. They were stripping naked from the pants and up, and then they were washing around. You know.
But this is the sort of intensity vector that is fascinated you, Mogens, looking at this, yeah.
Because this is apropos intensity. You have. I try to hear metal as Cynthia, and well. Now you presented 2 pieces, and I have very much difficult to see the difference between one and another. And there is a repetitive aspect that comes
in the music.
In the music,
yeah.
And so, to me, it could be a minus to the intensity.
The repetition. Okay.
It's repetition of what exactly?
Well, you know, the sound, the rhythm, and is nearly the same, and the voice as well. The grain of the voice, Roland Bach, is even the women have the same. You know, they have this way to modelize voice, and is true. Well, I come from another tradition, but I have difficult to see the clear difference between one piece and the other.
One piece of music. One song and one of music between bands.
Yes.
There's definitely something to say about the level of intensity. Also, intensity measured in a decibel, right?
Yeah,
which is intensity in a technical sense. It goes from here and then there. You know, it doesn't start really well. Some, of course, much metal does. They have 5 passages and breakups constantly.
No metal without electricity.
But I would say if you listen carefully, what happened in these songs I play today, just as examples, they break up constantly. They go fast, they go slow, they go upbeat, they go in a heavy groove, they go in a up-tempo groove, they go. They are, but it's not a verse, chorus, verse, chorus. No, it's A, B, C, D, E, F, you know, and perhaps A again at some point, or a riff. It's another structure, which is and one of the important aspects of, for example, technical death metal, is that you need to make a lot of variation. If you don't, well, you know that you need to practice more. You know.
Okay.
So, but I believe perhaps well, I'm not to say how you listen, but you might listen after those small variations.
Mm-hmm.
But it's crucial to understand what goes on in metal.
Mm-hmm.
But could it be that because of this structure that's not verse, chorus, verse, and so on, that the reason why some listeners find it repetitive or something like that is that it can be very difficult to hear when a song is about to finish. It could just go on and go in another direction, and it's, I mean, there are a lot of metal bands, different subgenres make either 1 minute songs or 30-minute songs, or so it's kind of difficult. Yeah, it's kind of difficult sometimes to know what's the beginning and the end.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Johnny had...
Yeah, actually Michelle Philippov from Australia has written a book about it, Death Metal and Music Criticism, where she argues that when you listen to death metal you have to listen with in a totally another way than when you listen to all other kinds of music, because there are no narratives and everything is cut up in little pieces like and so on. So you have to get used to it. You have to learn how to listen to death metal more or less, and then you can begin to find out what is going on.
I have 2 short comments I just want to shoot in because we're starting to run out of time. But did you hear Ted Graychick's talk, Claudio? He was the first talk in our series. He talked about the taste of metal, what it would mean to conduct a lot of the discussion of taste in aesthetics as this discussion is evolving, but with metal as the area of examples. And, you know, he kind of teasingly started his abstract by saying that, you know, many people do hate metal, and many people have a hard time listening to it seems. But does this in some way sort of handicap metal as a way of developing musical taste? And he doesn't think so at all. He actually enjoys metal, and he talks about how what it actually is a question of is what sort of discriminating discussion would people have who really spend time listening to metal, and then can point out different features and talk about different kinds of use of instruments. And so I think, I'm wondering how different this is than, now this may be a step that people don't take as commonly as when we were young, but when you go from listening to more or less garden variety classical music to listening to decidedly modern music. This is often a leap for many people, to be able to appreciate a composer like, say, Penderecki, or a composer like, even for many people, I'm sure that Shostakovich is a you know, sort of a Schoenberg, yes, exactly, would be a fine example, someone that is a bit of a challenge. So I mean, is there something that's, I'm not sure, could be an interesting discussion another time. Is there something that's qualitatively different about, say, the leap into metal?
That is a kind of conceptual
that metal would be.
Conceptual art.
That's that I don't know that I'd agree with that. Would you say,
That has a lot to do with what you're brought up with. If you're brought up with some kind of heavy rock, there's no difficulties at all in listening to heavy metal. To me, there is really, because, but I was brought up with Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, they are metal, so Rolling Stones, and so I mean I'm often surprised that people find it so hard to listen to, because I mean that's really
it's because the intensity should surprise me.
Suppress you?
And it should come automatically, the intensity.
I think you think that the intensity has something to do with
It's not just to the initiated forwards.
There's definitely something about heavy metal that demands of you to allow yourself to submerge a bit.
So, yeah, sure.
and give it a chance.
To be
and listen and listen and listen.
I try.
Definitely, I'm not saying that everybody should like heavy metal. I think many headbangers would hate that statement, really. They definitely don't want heavy metal to be played at DR's radio program, P3.
No.
Definitely not. Because then they would listen to something else. So there is some there is a part, and I'm talking about parts of heavy metal that is perhaps, this is not a popular mainstream heavy metal, but some of the most popular bands in the world are actually heavy metal. Metallica, AC/DC, Iron Maiden, and we have all the old band, Black Sabbath, etc., etc. Today they are celebrated by many listeners.
Yeah, sure.
So and this is another.
Maybe because they are more narrative.
I don't know. I don't believe in that naturalness in some art and not in other. But I believe if you want to study heavy metal, I would love if you listened really and find some metal that you really like.
But then again, ever since the appearance of rock and roll, I mean, it's just as much a matter of living it than it is of listening to it. I mean, it's I think it's totally right that people adopt a lifestyle, or you can segmentate people from their musical preference. But I think it's a bodily thing. It's more than listening.
Sure.
Much more than listening.
Yeah, sure it is. If it matters something. Do you know about Harboe, the central train station in Copenhagen? Yeah. At the one end, towards Eastergade. Yeah. Where you get, you will find hookers and you will find heroin, stuff like that. They are playing soft classical music. Yeah. Because people who would have loved to stay in that corridor, they don't identify themselves with the music.
It's the same in Sotto-Negrene.
Yes.
They play classical music to evitate people that.
Yeah, exactly.
And they also do it at the train station here in Rhodes. They also do it, and it's true. There are no homeless people there. There are no drug addicts. Nothing.
So then you're saying that this is very very interesting and perhaps flies in the face of what a lot of people like to believe. It's not that the classical music is edifying and is changing the behavior of drug addicts and prostitutes and whatever, and making them into nobler citizens, and that's why there are no evidences of this. It's just that it's not the kind of music, as you said, that people who are living street life would normally stand around and listen to, so it chases them away.
I have to go now, but thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
Well, on that note, we could keep this discussion going for a long time, and that's quite characteristic of this seminar. So thank you very much, Tore, and we will adjourn now, and then welcome everybody back again next week. Thank you.